thank you all very much for joining us for this lecture. Thank you for giving up your time. Thank you to Ralph for putting it together, and welcome to you all. So this lecture is going to be a presentation, one of the culminating moments of Ralph's artist in residency stint at the Ethics Lab. Ralph has been with us for the last 2 months, and he's been working broadly on 3 objectives. The first is, engaging neuroscientists here at the NI, all the different people who work at the NI, trying to figure out what they do and sort of use that work and art as a window to think about ethics. The second is he's been exploring the possibility for a light-based sculpture using dichroic lens here at the NI, which he's put out a prototype outside that we're hoping will spark engagement from those of you who've joined us today. And the third is Ralph has been helping the Ethics Lab come up with a framework for collaborating with artists in the future, to bring more artists to the Ethics Lab, to the Neuroscience Institute, to sort of help shape how we engage and think about the ethics of, well, ethics in general, but also specifically on new and emerging health technologies. So it's important, I think, to connect this residency to the Ethics Lab's broad research vision. So what's the attraction, to work with someone like Ralph? What do we do here? In general, the Ethics Lab, at the Ethics Lab, we are a fantastic group of people, dare I say. And we work at the intersection of the humanities, of ethics, of emerging technologies. I think ethics is what binds our work, and we try to leverage the African humanities to think about the ethical questions posed by new and emerging health technologies. And we do this through a range of activities, webinars, residencies like Ralph's, small stipends for, catalyst grants for small research projects, and I'm forgetting another one. And retreats, academic retreats. And interestingly, thanks Ralph, that's actually the context in which Ralph's stint at the Ethics Lab was particularly attractive. So it came at a moment where we were looking to explore conversations at the intersection of artificial intelligence and the imagination. We'd previously done work with scholars working in African philosophy, and so we're in a moment where we're partnering, collaborating with the Department of English and Literary Studies, thinking about how AI is fomenting conceptual disruption in terms of concepts like authenticity, authorship, originality, but also how it foments ethical disruption. And the invitation there was to trace how creatives, literary scholars, aren't just engaged in creative production, but in their capacity as storytellers are also ethicists. They make claims about the world we live in, desirable futures. And so Ralph, in his capacity as an artist, curator, scholar, and activist, has sort of helped us immensely to think about some of that, both in terms of his scholarship, but also in terms of his artistic production that sits comfortably within, I would say, commitments to interventionist art and critical design, both of which share the idea that, at least as I understand it, art isn't just about solving practical problems or sort of inviting interpretation. It also sort of intervenes in social spaces to help make things, social issues visible, expose power, expose power, and sort of helps shape how we see the world, how we perceive, how we feel, and change our understanding of the world accordingly. So it's, right now we're going to hear from Ralph about just what the last 2 months have entailed. From my end, it's been an immense pleasure sort of just interacting with Ralph. We've had, you know, those, I mean, the highlight for me, you know those conversations where you sort of are doing all the mind maps on the whiteboard, and at the end you just have to take a moment and take a picture of it to sort of capture that dynamism. We've had, we've had quite a few of those, even a lot of possibilities for collaborative writing as well. So I hope in this lecture you'll see all the generativeness and productiveness that we've experienced within the Ethics Lab in terms of Ralph's residency. So thank you all so much for joining us, and over to you, Ralph.
Should be. Thank you, Anya. Thanks very much for that introduction. Welcome, everybody. Hi. Most of you weren't here for my introductory talk, which was also mainly directed internally at the Neuroscience Institute. I wanted to introduce myself to the Neuroscience Institute. I am going to present in a condensed format some of that, as in I'm going to tell you a bit about my background as an artist and what kind of projects I've worked on. But it's going to be in a shorter version than my first introduction. So for those of you who were here for my first one, don't worry, it's not going to be the same thing again. It'll be shorter. And then I'm going to move on to the work that I've been doing here. So as Anya said, I've been here for the last 2 months. This is the 10th week of my residency. It's a part-time post, so it's equivalent to about a month's full-time work, is about, just to give you a gauge. And I was brought in under the EthicsLab's small research grant. That was the mechanism that they could bring me in by. So those of you who are here for my previous presentation will note that I'm going to go in the reverse direction to the previous one. So I'm starting with one of my first artworks that I have, which if you read it carefully, you can see I'm telling you where I live, which is in Richmond Road in Mowbray in Cape Town. And this is a drawing I did on a piece of cardboard. It's one of my first found object works. Sort of an intervention with a design for development object called the Wonder Box. Coincidentally, I ended up doing my PhD on design for development objects. Or maybe it's not a coincidence. You'll also see that there's a bird. So I like birds, and birds are a theme that I'm going to play on in this presentation. So each time I do a presentation, I try to do it slightly differently. And I also really wanted with this one to have some fun with what I'm doing. So I've tried out some things that I haven't tried before, and you can see if you can spot them. So this was my end-of-year work at Michaelis. I did an undergraduate degree in sculpture. As my final year work, I produced these large-scale sculptures made of waste materials, foam that I would get from factories in the early morning, sculpted them into these big forms, got speakers from TV and radio repair shops. This was in 1997. Installed them in these sculptures, and then DJ'd different sound sources through them, because I was also a DJ and promoter while I was at art school. And I installed them in the Transwerk yards in Salt River that are still there. So there was in amongst this industrial setting. So an interest in hanging things, which you'll see in my present work, and in sound and technology. The thing I should highlight most is that I'm very interested in what you can do with technology and media. I then moved, after my undergraduate degree at UCT at Michaelis, I moved to New York in 1999, and I did my master's at a program called the Interactive Telecommunications Program, where I learned how to program microchips, use computers, make all kinds of things that were interactive. The field was called physical computing, so it was about breaking out from your interaction with the screen and the keyboard in order to make interactive artworks. These are suits that respond to your voice, and part of your suit blows up and part of the other person's suit blows up when you shout in the suit. It's called front. And then this was my master's thesis work, a project called Suited for Subversion. It was a riot suit for protesters to wear. I was very active in street protests and planning and execution of them in New York. And I wanted to have a creative way of breaching the boundaries that the state and the police place around protest. So I made a suit that has a pulse reader and projects your heartbeat out of your body so other people can hear it. They can hear your internal state. So it's both a kind of vulnerable making and a powerful gesture. And it's based on what people were doing already as a practice. So people were making their own homemade protest suits, which starts to indicate some of what Anya was talking about, which is a situationist or interventionist approach to art, where you make the material of everyday life your artwork. I wasn't simply representing things, which is one thing art does, which is make a representation of something. It's more like taking the material that's around you and using that as the art. So I was doing my own twist on a everyday practice. I'm also, to jump chronologically and disconnect by theme, this was another artwork of mine that was a riff on Suited for Subversion, which used your heartbeat as material. And this is called Handy Ears, and they are silicon casts of my hands made by a special effects artist that you can place behind your head on a headband, and then you can hear differently. So I'll invite you to put your hands behind your ears. And do you notice a difference when you're listening? Yeah, so it highlights certain frequencies. So a friend of mine showed me that when we were on a walk in nature one day, and I was like, amazing. Now, if only I could still have my hands to do other things while I was doing that. So that's what I did. So this then became the second in a series of which you'll see more. I've also done a bunch of public artworks in Cape Town. This is Jetty Square, which are skeletal sharks that move in the wind on a space that used to be on the shore in Cape Town. So it's right near the train station, and it was on the old jetty that went down into the ocean. So there are sharks made of CNC'd aluminium. So CNC processes are when you have a computer controlling a machine that cuts out profiles. I'm mentioning this because it'll be something I'll be referring to as I go. So I work with machine processes quite a lot. This is another public artwork. Jetty Square is actually 20 years old, 2005, and this is 2019. I made a series of these red-winged starlings that are on the top of posts on a site in Belleville, and they also move in the wind. I'm really attracted to the red-winged starlings. They're like a motif for me. They're these inquisitive, playful, intelligent birds that you find on the mountain and in the city. And part of my intention with this project, this was an accompanying piece, which is giant grasses breaking out of the pavement and forming benches. And they're at the entrance to a park in Belleville. Both of these pieces were meant to be amplifying small things that are already in the space and drawing your attention to them. So you have grasses growing up through cracks in the pavement, and you have the red-winged starlings in the street. I wanted to make large versions of them that then make people notice the real thing more. You see a big version, it's like monumentalizing it. It makes you pay attention to the real thing as well. And also the symbolism of grass breaking through pavement is something I really like. It's this irrepressible nature, that is always finding a way up. And also it's a very immigrant population in Belleville, a lot of Pakistani and Somalian people living there. The red-winged starling is actually found all the way up the east coast from Somalia down to Cape Town. And I thought both the starling could be this connecting motif and the grass could represent finding a place somewhere else, and even if the resources might be meager, you can still find a place for yourself there. So working with the symbolic language, which is part of what art boils down to, is communicating through symbols, and how can you cultivate that? How can you use form and symbol to communicate ideas, feelings, sensations? This is an artwork I did in 2006. It's just pictures from it. What you're seeing is a picture of a stage with 8 speakers on them, arranged as if they're microphones. It's an artwork I made with a friend, Julian Yonko, who's a lawyer. We wanted to make an artwork that spoke about the history of Mbube, the South African track that became The Lion Sleeps Tonight, that became the subject of a legal battle in which the descendants of Solomon Linder, who's pictured here with his group, the Evening Birds, his daughters and granddaughters sued Hollywood music producers in order to get a share of the royalties of their father and grandfather's music. So we made a program that mixed from about 100 different versions of Mbube. So Mbube is one of the most sampled and reproduced and covered tracks ever. So we made a machine, a computer, that continually remixed and replayed the track Mbube. And you'll see that this interest in sampling and remixing comes up in my work at EthicsLab as well. So that was staged in Dublin. It's also been at the Vancouver Winter Olympics. It's been at a number of different shows. And then to just touch on my PhD work, so master's was suited for subversion. PhD work, as I mentioned, was looking at design for the developing world. It was looking at these iconic designs that were popular when I started around 2006. Things like the play pump that were presented as novel ways of communities getting water through children's play, making income through advertising, and then contrasting that with activist approaches to getting people basic resources in a way that was more antagonizing and accompanied with legal action. The play pump was a failed project. I made the subject of my PhD the play pump. It was something that, a project that attracted huge amounts of funding, like hundreds of millions of dollars of funding, to make these roundabouts to pump water that children operated. They were never going to work because the engineering aspect of them, they can't pump enough water for a community, and children don't want to play on them all the time. And even if they did play on them for 24 hours, they were less efficient than ordinary hand pumps. So what you had was women turning children's roundabouts by hand in remote Malawi and Mozambique as a result of a good story that was told to Western audiences when they saw photographs like this of many smiling children playing on a roundabout and securing a basic good. So my PhD was called Radical Plumbers and Play Pumps. I did work with the Anti-Privatization Forum and the Soweto Electricity Crisis Committee, who do illegal reconnections to water and electricity. So it's an activist, antagonist approach to how to get basic resources. And I produced all these ways of diagramming and analyzing what was happening in these kinds of objects. And what, excuse me, and what I was really getting at was this observation of objects that communicate to audiences and have functions for users. And you find this throughout, you find this in the art world, you find it in critical design, you find it in this field of design for the developing world. And in that field, when you have audiences in the first world who have more power, and you have users in the developing world, you get a predictable imbalance of power around these objects. So objects in development was my PhD work. And then back to birds. So this is my first African robot. It's a red-winged starling. Made it in 2013 as a project to start to engage with street wire artists in South Africa. This is post-PhD, applying a number of my interests and experience to doing it. We made a starling out of Nokia cell phone parts. So it's a form of artificial life. And by 2019, so 6 years later, we had secured enough funding to be able to make a much bigger artwork, which is Dubship 1 Black Star Liner, which is a giant wire art, electromechanical, sound-making dub spaceship. And this is the sound of the sculpture. It's being powered by a rotating oil drum, which again is a kind of programmable device. It's got a pattern of holes in the oil drum. We made VR versions of it and over COVID, so you could visit it online. And we made augmented reality versions of it. And most recently, we've been working on a sort of architectural intervention, which is a complex pattern of wire art pieces. And we've made a playable toy sculpture version. And we've taken it outdoors to the desert. Okay, so that's just a brief an overview of some of my work to date. And then one more project, which just brings it to the closest project to what I'm doing now is Bone Flute. So I made this work while I was a researcher at HUMA, the Institute for Humanities in Africa here at UCT, from 2021 to 2023. Our remit was to look at emerging technologies in healthcare in Africa. and I collaborated with a surgeon, an orthopedic surgeon who does 3D printing for surgical simulation. I explored Tygerberg Hospital and took photographs inside their lab. I was interested in things like this reproduction of Rembrandt's autopsy. Leonard, do you know the name of this work?
Yeah, it's the anatomy lesson of Dr. Toole.
Good, thank you, Leonard. I know Leonard would know. Leonard went to Michaelis before me, and Leonard is friends with Rudolf Venter, the orthopedic surgeon who I worked with on this project. So this is in their lounge. They have this old artwork that apparently is so accurate that surgeons today are still sort of wonder at the level of knowledge of what they can see happening in this painting. There's this long engagement between artists and doctors and scientists. What I was interested in doing with Rudolf was making my own artwork. I was interested in imagery of skeletons playing their own bones as instruments. This is from the movie Metropolis. So I had myself put through the hospital MRI scanner, produced a 3D model of my leg, and printed a copy of my femur. And then I worked with Rudolf Venter and a musician to operate on the femur in the same way that they operate on the reproductions of patients' bones. So a lot of what they do is to do with recognizing that textbooks and screen-based models are about ideal or typical anatomies, and that when you work with real people, you have atypical anatomies. And so if you can scan and reproduce people's real anatomy, you'll have a better, you'll have more success at what you're doing. And the other significant thing about it is that if you 3D print, surgeons can use their existing tools and processes. And this is me playing the flute. So, as well as a means of engagement with Rudolf, it was also a means of making an artwork for me, which is in the category you could call a memento mori, a reminder of death. Normally you have to be dead to be able to have a tune played on your bone. To indicate ways in which artists and scientists' work can be represented, I did a small exhibition in culmination of my fellowship where I showed the video, the object, we held events, and Rudolf spoke at the opening, the orthopedic surgeon, in which he said what I was doing was telling stories about his work in a compelling way to audiences who could understand things in a way they couldn't from him directly. And I also brought in a bit of African robots to my project in designing a wire snake automaton to play the blown flute. Okay, so to come up to now where I am with EthicsLab at the Neuroscience Institute. As Anya outlined, there's 3 objectives I started in with: to investigate and respond to the site, so just to get to know people, to talk to people, to see what they do, to see how I could engage with their processes. Research a sculptural proposal, which is the light-based work that you've heard referred to, and frame an artist in residency program, in which I've been meeting with the fundraiser, Zoe Boshoff is here. So here's where I'm trying something new. So I feel a bit like a bird sometimes, a bower bird who is looking around and picking up all these attractive little objects that they can find, and then placing them in interesting arrangements. I don't know if you know what the bowerbird is. It's this is the, I think it's the satin bowerbird. A bowerbird is a bird that is like an artist. It finds objects that are interesting and it arranges them, and that's how it gets its mate, is by doing that. I was going to say that I'm a magpie, but when I did my research, I found out that it's actually not true that magpies pick up shiny things. Apparently that's all made up. So magpies don't pick up shiny things. I've always said I'm like a magpie. The reason why I'm describing myself in this way is that as a researcher, I do sometimes drill down deep into one particular area, but mostly I flit across areas, and I'm very interested in the surface connections between things. I'm interested in an associative way of thinking, which has its limits, so to be recognized that for sure. There isn't necessarily a causal relationship between things that you might find an association between, but I think it's also can be a productive way of working, is to associate, to form constellations, to work widely across an area. So I'm a bowerbird when it comes to research. And Bowerbird Borland, yeah. And incidentally, one of my favorite artworks by Marcus Coates is called Dawn Chorus, is also about birds. So this is a view of an installation. So Marcus Coates made this work. This is a 2016 installation, which is 14 videos of people making bird sounds. So he used a very interesting process to do this. I'll show you one of the videos so you can see. So I first saw this at the Wellcome Collection in London, who incidentally, Wellcome is the funder for my research grant. And as you'll notice, it's speeded up. So these are members of amateur choirs who Marcus Coates worked with. He has a project to turn himself into an animal as one of his long-standing objectives. What he did for this project was he was fascinated by bird song, and particularly what you call the dawn chorus. So like before the sun comes up, you'll hear the birds start singing. He identifies how this dawn chorus is actually partially about conflict, especially for the male birds. It's about territory. It's about establishing their territory and warning off other birds. And the female birds, it's also about mating and attracting a mate. And what he did was he worked with a wildlife sound engineer. He recorded lots of bird song. Then he took it, he first hit upon this accidentally. He was slowing it down to listen to it more carefully. Then he slowed it down 20 times, the bird song, and he realized that it sounded like a human voice, and that he could sing it. So he started singing the slowed down version of the bird song. And then he sped it back up again, and it sounded just like the bird recording. So what he did, and what I'm going to sort of guide you through why I think this work is significant to what we're talking about, is he then made all of these choices around how to commission and capture and represent this idea. So he went around amateur choirs and he went and introduced himself, and he asked who would be interested in singing like a bird. So people volunteered. So number one, interventionist art technique, go to real material. Where is a group that's already doing a form of art, a form of production that you can incorporate into something you're interested in? Then you form relationships, you form engagements with other people, and you also give other people a new application to something that they're doing already. He then chose to film everyone where they said they spend a lot of time or where they are in the morning. So he has this whole range of situations. So that guy is just sitting up in bed, the woman is in the bath, this man is sitting in his living room, you have people sitting in their cars. Another key characteristic of an interventionist or situationist art practice is engaging with the everyday. So you tend to try and represent what actually is, and that's why it's often politically radical, is because you are not creating an illusion or creating sort of a synthetic appearance. You're trying to depict something that's real. So it ends up being a document of a time and a place in these people's everyday environments. So I love the whole way he did it in terms of the formal choices, the techniques, his engagement with science and technology. He worked with scientists to do it. He worked with technology to make some magic happen, and he worked with other people to make it possible. So Marcus Coates with Dawn Chorus. And just as a bonus associative link, here's a doctor with a skeleton is one of the people singing. So two of the leads that I was following at EthicsLab were, one of them was just the idea of imagination. So that started quite early. One of the influences was the retreat that we went on in the first week or so that I was here, called AI and the Imagination, so artificial intelligence and the imagination, We were trying to contrast or to explore, I guess, the tensions between thinking machines, as the world of Dune calls them, thinking machines that then might take the place of imagination, or could they augment imagination, and imagination as something that is very human and that we hold very dear. I wanted to take this idea of imagination as something that, you know, sort of resides largely in the brain. It's sort of invisible. It's behind most things. You have to have imagination in science as well as arts. So what is imagination doing? And I was also interested in this motif, which I've just represented as a symbol here, which is the idea of a more material thing, a more solid, tangible, visible thing, linked with a less visible, less solid, less material looking thing. So I call this diagram material, immaterial. The more I've talked to people, the more it's become apparent that this image and this idea is more of a tool to engage people with, because everyone I've talked to at the NI, I've showed them this diagram and talked about this concept, and people have a range of reactions to it. It's not a proposition that things are like this, but it's a reflection of how we often think about things as being, so my starting point was thinking about the brain as this chunk of meat in your head, and then the mind as being this amazing, hard to define, not fully understood thing that comes from the brain or merges with the brain. I had a very interesting conversation with Mark Soames last week, just before he left, and his response was to do with, well, it's not one thing or the other. It's not mind versus brain, and it's not the brain that produces the mind. Somehow they are both. They are one thing. And then other people I've spoken to have said, no, there is no immaterial thing. It's all a material thing. That's all it is. There, I mean, if you want to look into panpsychism, if any of you know panpsychism, it's actually one of the dominant or most prominent, let's say, one of the most prominent theories around consciousness actually is panpsychism, but it's pretty far out stuff. It's to do with the idea that consciousness is in everything. So we think about consciousness as a human attribute. The idea is that consciousness is almost like an energy or a material that is present in everything. So a desk has some small amount of consciousness in it, or curtains, or the carpet, or whatever. And if you're a materialist, you follow the idea that if I believe that everything is material, then consciousness must be material, and there must be some material basis to consciousness. Anyway, just to give you an indication of some of the ideas circulating around it. There is also this idea of calling this the hard problem around consciousness, because it hasn't been answered around what consciousness is. I also looked at this relationship in AI as this apparently frictionless, data-driven, smooth process where you interact with an AI on your computer screen, contrasted with the vast amounts of energy and resources that AI uses somewhere else on a global scale. That's another idea of material, immaterial. I also attended clinical ethics forums, a few of them I was here, which Heidi was running, which was a very privileged access that I was grateful to have to the hospital, where people were talking about their daily experiences of working in the hospital, and there were many different perspectives given by different people, from doctors to nurses to the CEO of the hospital, around the material conditions that they work in the hospital, and whether the problem is the material conditions, as in money, resources, people, how much of the problem lies in approaches, like ethical approaches to cultivating compassion, how much of it lies in other kinds of mechanisms which are not material. So again, I saw the presence of this idea of this tension between a overlay, which seems less material, and a substrate which is material. And I was also led to Marx. So Marx, if you look up material conditions, then Marx is the one that comes in. Also, the Communist Manifesto starts with something like, everything is pregnant with its contrary, which I also really liked, with the idea of these two as being contrary yet linked concepts. So Anya and I did some work in response to the AI and Imagination retreat. This is a photograph of FlowGPT, who is an Argentinian singer who gained prominence through using an AI-generated version of Bad Bunny's voice and making his own track. So his own original track, his own lyrics, his own music, but the voice is Bad Bunny's voice, which he was able to generate with an AI tool. And his brother helped him to create this mask to make him anonymous and to sort of represent him as this figure, which I guess is part technological. And working out of his apartment in Argentina, he produced this track that got lots of notoriety. Bad Bunny hated it. Other people thought it was interesting. He's trying to follow the scent of fame and visibility and having done this project, and he's moved to Spain with his brother, and he's trying to capitalize on this interest in what he's doing. But it was an interesting current example for Anya and I to tease through all the issues around how AI and imagination can work, as in AI can be AI slop, which is when AI produces all of this schlocky propaganda and kitsch imagery, and then itself or other AIs take that imagery up into itself and recycle it again, and you have this idea of AI systems almost poisoning themselves on their own output and taking vast resources to do it. But you also have these instances in which it seems AI, like any other new technology and reproductive technology, can be used creatively. So I think we're trying to, so personally, for myself, I'd say my approach is largely suspicion and being circumspect about AI, because it's not just about a technology, it's also about vast commercial interests that are advancing a particular technology. So if you're interested in the politics of any technology, whether it's a car or an AI, you want to look at what's driving it, who benefits, so on. But also, I'm also just wary of something that potentially replaces human things that we do and diminishes our power. But the more that I've held myself open to it and talked to people who use AI creatively, the more I see how you can use it creatively, you can use it in a way that augments your abilities. But I think one of the biggest tasks that I think we should be engaged in, and I think it would be a good position for Ethics Lab to have, is how to empower people in relation to AI. So how to have people really understand what happens behind the screen when you interact with an AI on your phone or a computer, and to understand all the different ways in which it can be incorporated into your life. So I'm very much into the idea of democratization of technology and empowerment as a way of doing that. So FlowGPT, here's a whiteboard, Anya. So this is capturing the idea of a piece of writing that flowed out of the AI and imagination retreat, in which we have 4 touch points. There is a series called Everything is a Remix, which is about art all being about remixing other sources, so kind of especially 1980s, 1990s perspective on sample culture, hip-hop, and so on. And the KLF, who brought out this book called How to Have a Manual the #1 Way in the 1980s, I mean the easy way, and How to Have a #1 Hit the Easy Way in the 1980s, a guide to cracking the music industry, and not trying to be original, but specifically trying to replicate other things behind, around you, though led by these highly original pranksters, art pranksters. They made at least £1 million, of which they burnt most of it in a ceremony, to show that they weren't doing it for the money. Then you have AI slop. So there was a really good essay on efflux by Kate Crawford, who wrote Atlas of AI, that was all about AI slop and the environmental damage caused by AI. And then we have FlowGPT. So this is Anya and I attempting to make sense out of it, and I believe that Anya has cracked it. So looking forward to seeing your next draft, Anya. I also wanted to take a direct approach to seeing what was happening with this material-immaterial relationship. So one of the first people that Jantina introduced me to is Francis Robertson, who works in medical imaging here on the same floor as us in neuroscience. And Francis actually works with fMRIs, so functional magnetic resonance imaging, which is reading your brain activity and being able to identify where it's more active during particular tasks. So this was me getting put into the MRI machine, where Francis and I developed a rough experiment just in a short space of time, where I would be sculpting with plasticine and then squeezing plasticine without sculpting as a control, sketching ideas for my sculpture, and then doodling randomly without depicting anything, looking at someone else's artwork, and then closing my eyes and visualizing my artwork, and forming all of these control and activity pairs, and then reading my brain activity and seeing if we could see anything that happened. I think we found the part of your brain that sculpts, interestingly. There's me, part of me. It is spooky. So this is not really much to see here, but just to give you a representation, because we really just have the raw results so far. So back to the bowerbird imagery, a lot of what I've done here is taking a lot of little things and picking them up and putting them down and identifying them. But all of them can take further development. For example, as you saw the video for Bone Flute, which was a trailer of a longer video we made, we've also my wife is a filmmaker, took video of the whole process with the MRI machine, and we have material to make a movie out of it, a short film out of it. This data as well, Francis and I have just started scratching the surface of what parts of the brain were more active when I was closed eye visualizing versus when I was looking at someone else's work. The sculpting part, I'm joking, but there was a small part of the brain which was active when I was sculpting that wasn't when I was squeezing. So we can investigate. It also points to previous work on it. So approaching this as an amateur and just going, this is something I'd like to do. I did do a bit of searching where I was like, who else has done this and when? So I can identify this has been done in various ways before. In terms of looking at visualization in particular. Usually it's things that are a bit more boring, like letters, like looking at letters or numbers and visualizing them and seeing what the brain is doing when you internally visualize. Mainly it seems to activate the same parts of the brain as when you're looking. So your sort of ocular kind of areas of your brain get activated, even if you're not looking at something like actually outside of yourself. If you're looking at something internally, similar parts of the brain activate. So in search of the elusive imagination, yeah, we haven't found it yet. Talking about the brain, I was also really interested in neuronal structures, and I've got to thank Haley for a really interesting conversation about neurons and how the brain is structured at a microscopic level. This is imagery of neurons inside a mouse brain. That's from a very recent study where they took a millimeter cube of a mouse brain and scanned it and 3D imaged it, and it's the most up-to-date, detailed depiction of neuronal structure, and they're doing it actually in a quest to help artificial intelligence or machine learning. So it's taking a biological source, trying to understand how the brain cells all connect up, using that as information to help structure a computer program or an AI. Just to pause there for a second, because this is another theme which I think is really interesting and is very worth pursuing, and that's the idea of machinic metaphors. So the idea that over time, humans have understood themselves often in relationship to the latest technology. So something I saw actually on a TV show when I was a kid, I think, is that the ancient Greeks, and I've more recently read the Egyptians too, thought that the heart was some form of metal smelting organ, like a forge or a furnace, because their dominant technology was metal smithing. So they formed these analogies, and then in the Industrial Revolution in England, when the water pump was invented, then we were able to see the heart as being like a pump. So when I say we're able to see it as, I think it's not quite as simple as that. I mean, I think partly a heart is more accurately a pump than a furnace, but I think that the view of the technology also influences us to see the body in a more reductive way. It's something that appears in a book called The Nutmeg's Curse that Jantina lent me at the start of the residency, which is to do with around the time of the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution, people starting to see the world as a bit like a clockwork mechanism, like something like nature as something that is mechanical, that has a sort of machinic quality to it. And how part of our struggle now is that we're dealing with the legacy or the still present way of seeing nature as being mechanistic rather than having some other kind of essence or spirit that maybe makes it different to that. These are some very early drawings of neuronal structures. So this is Cabron, is it? Cajal, yes, Ramoni Cajal. So he was drawing neurons. So he's a really interesting example of a scientist and artist combined from more than 100 years ago. He's one of the forefathers of neuroscience, who would be cutting up brain tissue and drawing by hand what he saw under the microscope and staining them to see these neuronal structures. Something I think is interesting about his approach is that the telegraph was the dominant technology of the time. And other people involved in neuroscience were saying, well, the brain is clearly like a telegraph system. You know, it's carrying electricity from one point to another. But he resisted that. And part of it is that he grew up in a rural area and he was very connected to plants and trees and nature. And he said, no, they're more like roots and rhizomes and tree branches. And that's more what the brain is like. So there was this already like more than 100 years ago, this kind of dialogue around what the brain is. And so similarly now, we have this idea of the brain being like a computer and AI being made in the model of the brain and this back and forth. But from everything that I understand about the brain, it's reductive to say that it's like a computer. We don't really have the same systems as a computer have. But in an everyday way, a lot of us think about our like short-term memory and our deeper memory and the software that runs on the hardware of our brain. And it all is quite an attractive way of thinking about it, but apparently quite inaccurate. So I started just trying to think about, this is bringing me to the sculptural aspect of what I'm talking about. So I started drawing just simple sketches of what would a sculptural, three-dimensional neuronal structure look like. Could I do a structure for a sculpture that would echo parts of how neurons connect up with each other, and also perhaps vegetation, also perhaps artificial intelligence neural nets? What this is based on, and this was actually my entry point to the Neuroscience Institute, so I think it's interesting that my entry point was a formal piece of art. This is a maquette for a public art proposal that was for City of Cape Town. This is only about 40 centimeters across, but it's a stainless steel cutout disc with many dichroic discs inside them. So dichroic is a material that reflects light in different ways according to the angle that it hits it at. I have some samples here for people, as well as a piece out in the lobby. And it's got this interesting property of perhaps lending itself formally to ideas around perspective, shifting perspective, where you're standing in relationship to it depends on how you see it. It reflects and it lets light through. And so I created this design that has many of them tilted at different angles. So this is all the same material, even though it looks like different colors at different points. So dichroic was first developed by NASA for the windows of spaceships to protect them from radiation when you're in space. And now you can get it as a film to apply to plexiglass. So this is just a video of dichroic sculpture working. So when I first came to the Neuroscience Institute, it was to visit my friend Jose, who's sitting in the front here, who does scanning and 3D printing of patients' anatomies as well, or produces surgical simulation models. I came to visit Jose and I was immediately impressed with the building, the architecture. I was like, wow, this atrium is an amazing space, and it's got light coming in from these high windows, a high ceiling. I bet you a dichroic mobile would look great in this space. So I went to a coffee club with Science Center. Stephen Sack, the director, is here. I'm going to join all the dots for you. And then I met Mandy Mason, who runs the coffee club over at IDM. And I met Haley, and I was there as a Science Center participant. And I just shared, some of my thinking, what I do and what I'm interested in. And that led through a series of talks with EthicsLab to the idea of coming into the space and being able to design something for a sculpture and at the same time do this wider engagement and relationship making and, adding to the intellectual life here. This is another application of dichroic that I did for an interior space in Cape Town. So you can see these discs are on these stirrups suspended from the ceiling, and they form these complex pools of light on the wall. So these are lit by spotlights. So these are 2 spotlights illuminating 20 discs that each are attached to the ceiling. So a lot of these processes, again, are machine processes to produce them. So it's laser cut plexi, it's machine curved metal, it's 3D printed parts. All of them I work out beforehand in rough models. So I love rough modeling in plasticine and cardboard and materials of that nature, and wire. And then in the end, they get produced with an industrial sort of approach. So what I've been doing while I've been here is my attention shifted from the atrium space, mainly because the atrium, when you start to look at it longer, it's very busy already with mainly with the lighting. So the lighting hangs from lots of thin wires across the whole ceiling space. So I think it is possible to do something in the atrium, but I could see these challenges around what's already there. And so when I started working with EthicsLab, there was this light well next to our offices on floor G, and I thought, what about dichroic works there? So you will notice that they're not attached to anything, which would be ideal. But that's because I haven't yet solved what the structure is that holds them. And I'll tell you a little bit about the choices involved here. So these are a whole range of sizes of dichroic lenses, ranging from 2 meters in diameter down to 0.5 meter in diameter. We're trying to indicate the way that they reflect off each other, as well as the way that they cast light onto the wall. So this is a video within a 3D model of looking at how the light would flow down the wall. So this is based on photographs that I took as well of different times of day. So this is around noon when the sun is overhead. And let me just show you. So where you see these chairs, it's actually a waiting area on the ground floor. So it's where patients wait. Something that's, I think, is amazing about this space is that it's an awesome sculptural space because it's visible from directly underneath, and it's visible from all the way up it from the sides, from the top. It's like it's got maximum visibility, as in you have to sculpt something that looks good from all angles, which is a nice challenge. Something that I wanted to indicate to you then about the question of the structure to support it is where I started out was looking at a classic Calder-esque mobile. So the sort of go-to person for mobiles is Alexander Calder, who was both into engineering and art. And we actually have at UCT already in the library and upper campus a Calder-type mobile, which are typically a spar on which a cable hangs and another spar, and then it hangs, and then you have a disc or something like that. In that orientation, in that system, all the discs would be vertical. So that's what this still shows, is vertically oriented discs, because they're all suspended from cables. What these other ones show is discs that are all at angles. And I want to show you how we are doing this. So this is a 3D model, and working with my collaborators, we're doing what's called procedural 3D modeling, which is that what you're seeing at the bottom of the screen is ways of controlling the 3D models through maths. So basically through entering different numbers into a series of interconnected nodes. It's called a node tree, the structure at the bottom. So it's branching information, and we can change the point of attraction of the angle of the discs. So if you see the point of attraction, like iron filings to a magnet, is being changed, and all the discs are following it. So it's this dynamic way of trying to create a sculpture that has a kind of an order to it. So we're in this process of trying to design the kind of layout of the discs. And then what I'm hoping to do, or what I would be planning to do if we made this, was to develop the neuronal branching structure between them, either in stainless steel rod in a more machined way, or possibly in handmade wire, but I'm going to give you some caveats with that. So this is me installing a sample in the atrium, which you can see out there. So you can tell I'm official because I have a hard hat and a high-vis vest. And what this is a sample. So you could say prototype, but also like a sample. It's like a small part of something as well as being perhaps a test for something. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to test out my work with wire artists on African robots, where I'm wondering if I don't have the slide in there. I can show you later. But I work with wire artists in African robots, and I thought it would be interesting to try out handmade wire art as the structure that supports the discs, because it has so many of these interesting formal overlaps with neuronal structures. You talk about rewiring the brain, for example. So we were making these in my studio. We were making these handmade bundles of wire that were making the structure for the discs, and I was enjoying this bringing into the project of the human hand. Though the other way of doing it, and which would be probably more practical, is to use a machine-controlled process to make them. And something you'll see is that it's quite droopy, the one that's out there. And just to acknowledge, I think as an artist, I like to be transparent as much as possible. So to say it's droopier than I planned, but that's part of the game, is you don't always get exactly what you want. So I still enjoy it. I enjoyed the process of making it, and it's a test. But does it look exactly how I wanted it to? No, it doesn't. But that's just what happens, is that you don't always get exactly what you want. But again, I think I still like that I made the choice to try something different rather than have it computer manufactured, which was the other route. So the third objective in my residency is to do work towards framing an artist-in-residency program, or what Zoe and I are now calling a creative residency program at the NI, which would be a program where we could bring in more people like me and more people different to me to work at the NI, to do this kind of relationship making with people who work here, to produce work. They could be musicians, poets, dancers, visual artists, and they could have a range of ways of engaging with the work here. The slide that I have up is Zoe's project, the African Research Funding Accelerator. And as part of my residency here, I've been doing the course that Zoe offers, and which other people here have also done, as a way of creating a fundraising document to fund an artist-in-residence program. So we're partway through it. Actually, Jantina is recognizing the process. It's hard. It's a really hard process, but valuable. I'm really happy to be doing it. So yeah, no, thanks Zoe for taking me into this process. We're partway through it, but it is very challenging to condense all of one's ambitions and ideas into a streamlined document, but that's what's needed in order to generate the funding for it. And Zoe has many examples of successful clients who've done this program. So this is a way of breaking down what the challenges are, and if we look at mechanisms, this is one of the ways to think about how this would happen. The research leadership is pointing towards, I think that if the Institute wants to take in a really wide range of artists, a diverse range of artists, then you will need someone to be a curator, interlocutor, someone to enable the connections to happen between scientists and artists. So that's what the research leadership is about. The interdisciplinary engagement is to, actively recruit people from different disciplines to work across the university for a start at UCT, as well as across other institutions and people outside of institutions, and to put people together in unexpected ways. We've already been chatting with the dancer, Jackie Job, who's starting her own institute at UCT, the School of Intimate Imaginings. And she's really interested in doing work with neuroscientists. And I think that in terms of themes, one of the many themes that I'm interested in embodiment is a huge theme, which I think has a good relationship to neuroscience. What's the relationship of the brain to the body, and how are they not separable? So unless you go with the brain in a vat sort of concept, we are actually merged in terms of our brains and our bodies, and we think with our bodies as well as we think with our brains. And hosting and resourcing artists. So the hosting part is how can we create welcoming structures for artists? So I noticed that, say, Francis Robertson, who I did the fMRI scan with, was one of the first people that Jantine introduced me to at the NI. And I did meet other people, but I think that that experience made me think that a structured introduction of people who come in here to everyone at the Institute would really be a sort of an icebreaker. I also did meet Erin with the COIN group, the genomics group. So we sent out a circular email, and some people responded to say, come and see what we're doing. So I went and saw what Erin was doing in terms of genomics. Also talked about material, immaterial, sort of the genetic coding that gets expressed. But the hosting is about how to facilitate relationships. And the resourcing is paying artists. That's the, that is something that artists really need. Because I think maybe more than any other profession, artists get asked to do stuff for free a lot, and that wasn't the case with this. So I'm very grateful for the resources being provided by your research grant to pay for my time and to pay for some of my processes and materials to do this. So it's important. If you choose the right people, then providing money is like putting fuel in the car or electricity in the car, whatever way you want to see it. And the person just runs. So but you need those resources, and that's part of what I'm developing with Zoe, is that idea. So as a rough outline, what we're thinking of doing is we could do ad hoc artists in residences over 2026, if that works out, if we are successful with our funding, where we bring in one artist at a time, perhaps 3 over a year. At the end of that, hold a form of symposium where we share the results of what the artists have done, and we invite other players to come in and see what we're doing and contribute. And from there, start to develop a more formal program for one of the terms is artists in labs. That's a recognized term internationally, is to describe this work. And I'll give you a couple of examples. So this is one of my colleagues from Michaelis, Camille Hassim, and Ian Purnell. This is off one of the UCT News websites. I think it's off the Michaelis website. So they won a residency hosted by CERN, which is in Switzerland, the nuclear particle accelerator. They have probably the flagship Artists in Labs program that's been going for a long time. So they recruit artists from around the world to come and work with scientists at one of the most cutting-edge scientific facilities. A feature of their work, as in some of the other prominent residencies, is that they don't require a particular output. So I like making stuff, so I have no complaints about making stuff, but it's also an interesting way to facilitate artists' work, is that often they don't require a particular output. They just say, come and explore, come and do what you want, and then people can't help themselves but make something. So this was a residency that was shared between CERN, the South African Radio Astronomy, and the Astronomical Astronomy. So Camille went, and I know him. He's a very amazing artist and musician who would be also great for engaging with science here. Wits University has been running an Artists in Labs program. This is the most recent one. This is run by the Wits Innovation Center. Christo Doherty is chair of research there. And they've been placing artists in science labs at Wits for the last few years, and learning all the time from that process. He's just got a new paper out that's about how to connect these processes to street-level science and technology as well. And Hugh is a bit of a performance artist. He was working with the Lightning Lab. If you look him up online, he calls himself Huge Silly Toe. I'm just going to grab a note. Grab my note here, because there's a name that I want to give you. So this person and this project has been circulating in my mind since the beginning, so I wanted to share it with you. So this is Merle Ladderman Ukeles, and I know her more through her work. It's quite an iconic artwork, which is called the Touch Sanitation Project, which was in 1979 to 1980 in New York, where she had written, she was a New York-based artist, she became a mother, and she wrote a manifesto in 1969 called the Maintenance Manifesto, which argued that maintenance should be seen as an art form, as in the daily work she was doing for a child and for a house, and as an artist, maintenance should be seen as a creative act. So as one of the outputs of the Maintenance Manifesto, she produced a work called the Touch Sanitation Project, in which her objective was to shake the hand of every sanitation worker in New York, so every garbage man. And she shook the hands of 8,500 sanitation workers over 1979 to 1980. And after that, they made her the first artist in residence and the only artist in residence with the New York Sanitation Department. So I just really enjoy her approach to taking something which is a gesture, and it's about relationships, physical contact, recognition, and making that into an art project. So I think that was just something that I wanted to include as a touch point for the possibilities for how artists can work with people from other professions. I think as one last thing, just as a teaser, I don't have this here with me because I'm still gluing magnets in it. I'm also going to be providing a special edition of my XOX art toy to EthicsLab and the Neuroscience Institute as a gift, though you're paying for it largely. But so I'm selecting the gift, I'm making it. So it's going to be an extra-sized version for you. Because what I saw in the lounge is that you have chess sets and games, and I thought it would be great to add another game to that, so you can play with a special version of XOX. That's my Instagram handle, or my handle across lots of different platforms. That's my head. And thank you. So we're happy to discuss. You've still got time and snacks, I believe, outside. So yeah, welcome to continue chatting. Do we want to do any questions here? Yeah. Either one, just ask. Yeah.
Outside, like, we can approach you and... Actually, you know what? Yeah, let's check anyone. Sorry, first of all, thank you very much, Ralph. Not only for showing us your head, but for showing us what's in it. Does anyone want to offer a quick comment or appreciation of what we've just heard? That's one option. And then alternatively, we can also just go out for some snacks. Ralph will be around. We can interact with him there as well. So what sounds good? Option A, option B, option B. Okay. So thanks again very much, Ralph. Let me, thanks again, Ralph. I'll invite you all to join us outside for some refreshments. And Ralph is looking forward to, I guess, engaging with all of us, but also to show us the mock-up the sample that is installed out there. Thank you. Thanks, Ralph.